then
Yeah.
forever.
That sounds new.
Yeah.
Okay, so no, that's not the.
I think, how do we turn it on?
Maybe they turn it on themselves.
Let me just check.
Yeah.
It is on already. Yes. You just need to speak, and the operator will adapt the volume.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, and the representatives of the world's indigenous peoples and the local communities. I would like to call the meeting to order. I invite delegates to take their seats. Distinguished delegates, in my capacity as a representative of the President of the Conference of the Parties, I have the pleasure to chairing this meeting.
Microphones aren't working, or the.
Well, let's see. Maybe continue.
Continue.
Yes.
I'm pleased to welcome you to the 12th meeting of the ad hoc open-ended intersessional working group on Article 8J and the related provisions. It gave me great pleasure to invite Mr. Kenneth Deere to come to the podium to offer us a traditional indigenous opening. Dr. Deere is from the Bear clan of the Mohawk Nation of the Kanawha Territory. Okay, thank you. Welcome, Mr. Deere, to chair this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for welcoming us. Are the microphones working? Okay, good. It's absolutely an honor to be invited to open this meeting. My name is Kenneth Deere. Zahayandu is the name in my language. It means the fire still burns, and I'm of the Bear clan. We are a matrilineal society, so I am, my mother is Bear clan, so therefore I am Bear clan. All of our leadership is all appointed by women. It's with the authority and the power of the women that I have this authority to speak to you and address you. I'm a Mohawk, also known as Ganyangahaga in my language, and we are part of what people know as the Iroquois Confederacy or the Six Nations Confederacy, but we call ourselves the Haudenosaunee. And in our traditions from time immemorial is that when we all gather together and we have to make decisions of great importance, we always take into consideration all of creation before we begin our deliberations. And these words have been said from time immemorial, that they are called the words that come before all others. And they begin right from the beginning when acknowledging the very earth that we walk upon. We look at the earth and all the stones and everything, the mountains, the plains, all of this area that we walk on, all has a spirit. And that we have to acknowledge that spirit that we live on. Some of us call it Mother Earth. And so we have to give thanks to that, for the duty and the responsibility that Mother Earth has for us. And we give thanks for that. And then we also have to give thanks to all the things that grow from Mother Earth, from the earth, and all the plants, and all the, particularly the medicines that come up, the natural medicines that are a gift to us, and that we use for our good health. And we give thanks to the creation that we have all of these medicines and all of those that come up from the earth. And we give thanks for that. And also for all the food that comes up from the earth. In our case, we are people of the corn, and that we give what we call the three sisters, the corn, the beans, and the squash, that nourish our people and that we grow from the earth. And all the other plants that come up, the strawberries and the raspberries, and all of those things that give us sustenance we give thanks to. And all of you, around the world, you also have your own plants, your own medicines, your own things that grow from the earth that sustain you. And so we give thanks to the creation for all of those things that are given to us. And then we also give thanks to the larger things that grow from the earth, and that's the trees that cleanse our air, the trees that also feed our people. We give thanks to the maple tree, what we call the grandfather of all trees, that give us the first harvest in the spring of maple, with the syrup, the sap that comes from the tree, and that we use to make maple syrup, and that sweetens our food. And all the other trees that have a responsibility in the earth, the birch and the pine, and all of these trees, that we give thanks to them for the purpose that they live for, and how they warm our homes. We give thanks to the trees. And then we look at the animals. We look at the small animals on the earth. And we look at the squirrels and the foxes and the rabbits and the raccoons and all of those small animals that serve a purpose in life. And that we give thanks to the creation for these animals which serve a purpose, and which sometimes we use also for our own purposes, whether it be sustenance or others or other useful things that they give to us. So we give thanks to creation for the smaller animals. And then we look at the larger ones, what we call the four-legged animals like the deer, the moose, the bear, the caribou, and all the other animals that we give thanks for. All of you around the world, you have your own animals that you want to that serve a purpose in your life, and the horses and the cows, and all of these that serve a purpose. We give thanks to creation for them, for what their purpose is, whatever that purpose may be, whether it be to sustain us, whether to give us clothing or tools. We give thanks to the larger animals for their purpose in life. And then after that, we look into the waters, and we look into the fish, and all those creatures that swim in the water, and all of those things that have a purpose, the trout, the salmon, the eel, the turtles, the frogs, all of those things that swim in the water, that have a purpose in life. And whatever that purpose may be, we give thanks, whether it be to sustain us, to sustain our living, or even to why they're beauty for us to observe them. We give thanks to all those things that swim in the waters for the purpose in creation that they have. And then we look to our feathered friends, the birds that fly, the birds that sing in the morning, that give us so much pleasure. We give thanks to the birds and to the larger feathered friends like the duck and the geese and the swans, and all of those feathered friends that all of us know in our own country that serve a purpose. And we give thanks for those feathered friends. And in particular, the eagle, which to us is that connection between us and the sky world that serves a purpose and also helps bring the messages that we want to give to those that we believe in. And then after that, we give thanks to the four winds, for the four winds have a purpose, and they bring us the rain that replenishes our streams, our rivers, and our lakes, and also brings lightning, and to the thunderers that purify the air, and that the wind also takes the clouds away so that we can have the sun and the warmth, so that our fields and we are warm, and that our crops can grow. So we give thanks to the four winds for the important work that they do. And then we look to the sky, and we look at the stars at night, and we look to guide us at night, so we don't get lost. We know where we are and where we are going. And also the stars also represent where we go when we pass on. And we no longer have life here, and our spirit goes somewhere else. And we believe that's where our spirits go, somewhere out there in the great mystery, that the stars represent where we will go when we are no longer here. So we give thanks to the stars and for the purpose that they serve. And then there's the moon. And the moon has a very special relationship with our women. And the moon not only gives us light at night, but it also has a relationship with the cycle of our women. And there's that close relationship with the moon, and that we appreciate the moon, and it controls the tides and many other things that maybe we don't always understand. So we give thanks to the moon for the purpose that it serves in our life. And then there's the sun. And with the sun, there would be no life, and that we give thanks to the sun. And we also look at the sun as probably a superior being, and that it could, because without the sun, we would not be here. And so we give thanks to the sun for the warmth that it gives us and the seasons that we have. So we give thanks to that very, very important element in our life. So now that we've looked at all of those things that affect us, and all those things in creation, the earth, the plants, the animals, you know, and the moon and the sun, we also have to, and their role in creation, and now we have to look at ourselves as human beings, because we are also part of creation, and we all have a purpose here in life. And we try to understand the purpose of the animals and the fish and the birds. We try to understand them, but we also have to understand what is our role in creation, and how we fit in creation, and how we're supposed to live together, and go on and exist from now and all into the future. So when we meet here to talk about the biodiversity of our lives, of the earth, we also look at the biodiversity of the human being and our role in protecting all of the biodiversity. And so when we make our deliberations here over the next 5 days, keep your consideration all of creation, because you have a duty and a role to protect that biodiversity. Just as the biodiversity helps and protects you, you keep that in mind. And all of us have a lifelong journey to find out what our role is in creation, and what that role would be. That's our destiny. That's every individual in this life has a role in creation. And it's your duty to find out what that role is from the time you are born until the time you die. So with these words, and with these instructions to keep all of creation in mind in your deliberations, I open this meeting for the next 5 days. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Deere. I extend my gratitude to all the indigenous people and the local community representatives attending this meeting. Distinguished delegates, first and foremost, I would like to thank Mr. Kenneth Deere and the other representatives of indigenous people and the local communities for welcoming and offering us this blessing as we convene here today for this meeting. My gratitude also goes to the Swiss government for the support to this conference. During the past 2 days, we had the international dialogue with indigenous peoples and the local communities and the relevant stakeholders on the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and the Gender Plan of Action here in Geneva. Listening to perspectives and analysis on roles of indigenous people and local communities in this important cause, and the expectations of how the new program of work on Article 8J and other provisions of the Convention support the realization of the framework's goals and targets. The message is very clear: building bridges between cultures and knowledge systems, as well as recognizing, valuing, and supporting the collective and local action of indigenous peoples and local communities would be critical steps forward. Standing here before you, I'm reminded of the long road we have walked and together since the first meeting of the working group on AJ and related preventions occurred in Seville, Spain in 2000. Today, I'm honored in this regard. I would like to share with you some good examples in China. China has actively established a system of protected nature areas with national parks as a main component, nature reserves as a foundation, and various nature parks as a supplement. It attaches great importance to the value of protected area and size for the protection of rare and endangered species. Numerous biocultural protected area founded on traditional culture and under community administration contribute prospectively to the preservation on both ecological and cultural diversity. Yunnan province, this side of the part one of COP15 has been actively supporting the prevention of biodiversity and biodiversity-related traditional knowledge by initiating many pilot projects for the protection of sacred natural sites in communities. By its own methods, despite current best efforts, biodiversity continues its rapid decline, and in an alarming rate, we continue to lose forests, wetlands, and other ecosystems, particularly across the globe. At the same time, the IP-based global assessment revealed that nature is generally declining less rapidly in indigenous people land than in other land. Distinguished delegates, in these transformative times, indigenous people and local communities, biological and cultural diversity can and should make a virtual and major contribution to overcome the crisis. In short, the work being carried out here this week offers an opportunity for parties to listen to the words indigenous people and the local communities to take a lead in the implementation of international commitments contained in the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Let's be guided by our long-term vision of living in harmony with nature by 2050. As we consider the agenda item before us, I encourage us to recognize the vast common ground on which we can work and build on in building a new proposed program of work for Article AJ and other preventions, as well as institutional arrangements that can effectively support the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. I am convinced that recognizing, valuing, and supporting the collective and the local actions of indigenous peoples and local communities will be central to our success in reaching our 2050 vision. This working group is a preeminent body of the Convention to building bridges between cultures and knowledge system for our journey to be living in harmony with nature. So my final message to you is be inspired by the framework to be ambitious, inclusive, and optimistic. Let us seize on the opportunities of this 12th meeting of the working group to highlight the centrality of the collective and the local actions of indigenous people and the local communities in supporting the implementation of this framework. Distinguished colleagues, you have a rich agenda before you. We will start with the following items. Item 3, in-depth dialogue, the role of languages in the intergenerational transmission of traditional knowledge in innovations and practice. Then we move on to address item 4 on the progress in the implementation of the priority, and item 6 on the proposed new program of work and the institutional arrangement. After joint considerations of item 6 and 4, item 5 on the knowledge management component of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework will be introduced. This will be followed by the consideration of item 7 on the joint program of work on the links between biological and cultural diversity, and finally by item 8 on the recommendations of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. Esteemed colleagues, as we work together over the coming days, let us do so with a spirit of teamwork. I wish us fruitful deliberations, and I look forward to working with all of you to ensure the success of this meeting. With this, I declare the 12th meeting of the ad hoc open-ended Intersessional Working Group on Article 8J and related provisions officially open. I now invite the Acting Executive Secretary of the Secretariat of the Convention, Mr. David Cooper, to address the meeting. You have the floor, Dr. Cooper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, Mr. Kenneth Deere, representatives of parties and of the world's Indigenous peoples and local communities, distinguished delegates. I extend a warm welcome to you to Geneva as we gather here from all corners of the world. I'd like to extend my sincere gratitude to Kenneth Deere of the Mohawk Nation, the Ganawaki, for his traditional blessing for our work. As well, I would like to thank you, Mr. Chair, and the Chinese presidency and all Bureau members for your continued leadership and guidance, and also our colleagues among the Indigenous peoples and local communities for their cooperation in preparing for this meeting as well. I'd also like to thank our host, Switzerland, for facilitating our presence here and for welcoming us here. I'd also like to thank the many donors who have made these meetings possible by supporting the participation of delegates from developing countries and countries with economies in transition, including Australia, Austria, Belgium, Canada, Finland, Germany, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, New Zealand, Sweden, Switzerland, the Republic of Korea, Japan, and the United Kingdom. Distinguished delegates, this working group has served us as a forum for a rich cultural exchange for more than 20 years. Its achievements have been very significant. I will not list them all here. Suffice to say that this working group has raised the profile of Indigenous peoples and of local communities as essential partners in our work, especially as on-the-ground partners in implementation. We've reached a pivotal moment, not just in the life of this working group, but in the relationship between the Convention and Indigenous peoples, as well as local communities. The interrelated crises of climate change, biodiversity loss, and the degradation of lands and waters are threatening the health of the planet and undermining the health of people. Relying on nature for their everyday needs, Indigenous peoples and local communities are among the most directly affected by these crises. But they are also at the forefront of defending the environment and protecting Mother Earth. The Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework is a key milestone, as it clearly acknowledges the important roles and contributions of Indigenous peoples and local communities as custodians of biodiversity and as partners in its conservation, restoration, and sustainable use. The framework also recognizes and considers diverse values, systems, and concepts, including those that recognize the rights of nature and the rights of Mother Earth. Recognizing the human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is crucial to the framework, underscoring that biodiversity is essential for supporting life on Earth. The implementation of the framework must ensure that the rights of Indigenous peoples and of local communities are respected. Building on its substantial achievements over 2 decades, this meeting will consider both the new program of work for Article 8J and other provisions of the Convention, as well as new institutional arrangements to facilitate the inclusive implementation of the framework towards our vision of living in harmony with nature. And it's poignant to recall that the traditional territories of Indigenous peoples continue to safeguard lands and waters that remain significantly less degraded than much of the rest of the world. These territories are the last refuge of a considerable portion of our planet's remaining biodiversity, as well as cultural and linguistic diversity. The intimate, interwoven relationship between these communities and nature reminds us of our shared responsibility towards biodiversity, towards nature and each other. Distinguished colleagues, the task before us is of paramount importance if we are to implement the ambitious objectives outlined in the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. As countries update their national biodiversity strategies and action plans and align national targets with the framework, let us remember that there are no better partners than Indigenous peoples and local communities. They hold considerable traditional knowledge as well as contemporary experience relevant to the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. Although this working group has effectively contributed to raising the profile of Indigenous peoples and local communities and the value of their traditional knowledge in our work, I'm convinced that we can collectively do more to tap into the power of traditional knowledge and local action to reach our goals. This is a new opportunity, and we must seize this moment to do so. I hope you may keep this in mind in your deliberations this week. I trust that the work before you will be a catalyst for unity, transcending the polarization that has enveloped so much of our world. Let us build consensus and pave a way forward. I'm pleased to report that Indigenous peoples and local communities, women and youth, working with parties, have already started work. An international dialogue held just prior to this meeting has allowed them to prepare their thoughts and to start an informal dialogue with parties and other partners on some of the topics that will be addressed under the various agenda items this week. Let us be ambitious. We have a very good basis for our work, and I would like to thank the members of the ad hoc technical expert group for preparing the draft program of work, as well as all those that have contributed through their comments to this process. I'd also like to thank Brazil for hosting the ad hoc technical expert group and for arranging a visit to the Indigenous communities. I trust that we can find consensus, and I hope the working group can send a clean recommendation on the proposed new program of work to COP16. This would send a very positive and strong signal and be a catalyst for our ongoing efforts to align all of the programs of work with the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework to support its implementation. We have an exciting agenda ahead of us, and I extend my best wishes to all of you for a successful week ahead. Thank you very much.
I thank you, Mr. David Cooper, for your opening remarks. I would like to reiterate my thanks to you for the outstanding work that you and your team did in supporting us throughout a complicated negotiation process towards the adoption of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. And of course, for all the hard work done in relation to preparing for this meeting. Distinguished representatives, we will now move to item 2, organizational matters. Before we start our work, I would like to invite the Secretariat to give us some information on the use of the microphones and on accessing documents from the website and other logistic information. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you wish to speak, please press the mic button only once. Once the mic light will turn green and we will be notified of your request. Please know that pressing the button twice will cancel the request to speak. The chair will invite you to speak when it is your turn, and the technicians will turn on your microphone and your light will become red. Please start speaking. Please remove your earphone and keep them away from the microphones to avoid feedback. Please speak close to the microphone, slowly and clearly in dictation speed so that interpreters can provide a clear translation. This is important as it will allow all delegates to fully understand your intervention. Some delegates from IGO, Indigenous People and Local Communities, and NGOs who request the floor may be identified only by a number and not their organization name. When you are given the floor, please identify your organization before commencing your intervention. Delegates are requested to upload their statements, their written statements, using the online application on the meeting page. In case of any difficulty in using the online system, delegate may send the statement by email to statement@cbd.int. It greatly facilitates the work of the interpreters if you upload your statements prior to delivery. However, your statement will only be posted on the website after your delivery. In any case, statements must be submitted within 1 hour after the close of the session in which the agenda item was considered. In your submission, please make sure to include the name of your country and organization and the agenda item on the first page of the document that is uploaded. Uploading instructions were included in your Priority Pass mail, along with your dedicated link, which leads you directly to the upload page. Please note that the venue hours of operation are from 7 in the morning until midnight. For that, we request that all delegates leave the premises by midnight and that the building be empty. Finally, catering services within the venue will be operational from 9:30 until 8:30. In an effort to reduce paper consumption during official CBD meeting, the Secretariat is no longer printing hard copies of in-session document for distribution. Participants are strongly encouraged to use electronic versions of the document available for download on the website. We would like also to draw your attention to the mobile application CBD Events app, which was developed for the UN Biodiversity Conference in 2018. The CBD Events app is free of charge for both Android and iPhone and can be downloaded from the CBD website at www.cbd.int/CBD-events. Thank you in advance for your commitment and support to reducing paper consumption at the CBD meetings. In addition, in order to further reduce consumption during the meetings, we would request participants to keep their name badge, lane words at the end of this meeting and to bring them for future CBD meetings so they can be reused. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Secretary. Distinguished delegate, I now invite you to item 2 of our agenda, entitled Organizational Matters. Starting with sub-item 2.1.1, invite delegates to consider the election of officials. In accordance with Rule 26.5 of the Rules of Procedure, the Bureau of the Conference of the Parties shall serve as the Bureau for its meeting. Therefore, in accordance with Rule 21, the Bureau agreed to designate Ms. Sihosana to act as a reporter of the meeting. Can I take it as this generally acceptable? I see no objection. It is so decided. I congratulate Mr. Sihosana for her designation as a reporter, and I invite her to take her seat on the podium. In addition, in keeping with the well-established and unique practice of this working group, the Bureau would like to propose the designation of 7 representatives of indigenous peoples and local communities as friends of the Bureau. You may recall that the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, UNPFII, and the Expert Mechanism on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples recognize 7 indigenous social cultural regions. The 7 representatives will be invited to attend the meetings of the Bureau and to act as co-chairs of possible contact groups. One of the friends of the Bureau would also act as co-chair of the working group. This approach ensures the fullest participation of representatives of indigenous peoples and local communities in this meeting, and the working group has always benefited from this established practice. Therefore, I propose that the representatives of indigenous people and the local communities be invited to designate 7 friends of Bureau, one of whom should be designated as co-chair for our meeting, as well as co-chairs for any contact groups or other arrangement as needed. I understand that following their consultations, the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity, IIFB, has nominated the following representatives as friends of the Bureau. Ms. Lucy Molenke from the African region, Ms. June Rubis from the Asian region, Ms. Yolanda Tarrant from Central and South America and the Caribbean region, Ms. Paulina Subieva from Central and East Europe, the Russian Federation, Central Asia and Transcaucasia region, Ms. Rucheli Driver from the North American region, Ms. Teresa Christine Grant from the Pacific region. Regarding the Arctic region, unfortunately, we received the notice that the representative from the Arctic region would not be able to attend this meeting, and as a result, the Indigenous Caucus was not able to nominate any representative from this region. The Indigenous co-chair identified is Ms. June Rubis. Can I take this as the nominated representative are acceptable to the working group? I see no objection. It is so decided. This completes our decision on agenda item 2.1. I congratulate the 7 friends of the Bureau and look forward to working with them to ensure the success of this meeting. I would like to invite the Indigenous co-chair, Ms. June Rubis, to join me on the podium. I now invite Ms. Rubis to make a few brief remarks. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Co-Chair. I want to begin by expressing my sincere appreciation for the trust that you have placed in me. It is an honor for me to have been nominated as co-chair, and I thank the Indigenous Caucus and promise to serve to the best of my ability to advance our shared interests and trust. One of the distinctive and enriching aspects of the meetings of the Working Group on Article 8J and related provisions lies in the diverse range of practices that have been put in place to ensure the full and effective participation of Indigenous peoples and local communities in our Working Group meetings. These practices are the embodiment of inclusivity, reinforcing the fundamental principle that the voices of those who live in harmony with nature are not only recognized, but heard. We have identified the challenges that lie before us, and we have convened with a shared purpose, the pursuit of transformative solutions. Through open dialogue, collaborative efforts, and the exchange of knowledge and experiences, we can navigate the intricacies and address the issues that profoundly impact Indigenous peoples and local communities. Mr. Chairman, I am committed to assisting you in this important endeavor. With shared determination, I am confident that our collective efforts will yield meaningful and positive outcomes for all. Once again, thank you for entrusting me with this role.
Thank you. I look forward to working together to guide the work of this group. I now invite you to turn to document the CBD-WG8j-12/1 REV/1, the provincial agenda. The proposed agenda is based on the mandate of the working group set out in Decision 15/10. It has been approved by the Bureau. I now submit the provincial agenda for your adoption. I see no objection. The provincial agenda is therefore adopted as the agenda for this meeting. During this morning, all sessions will be held in plenary. Each item will be introduced by the Secretariat. The working group will move to statements, focuses on the draft conclusions and the recommendations on these items immediately after the introduction of each item by the Secretariat. Priority will be given to regional statement. During yesterday's COP Bureau meeting, a proposal was put forward to allow representatives of indigenous people and the local communities the opportunity to address the working group before parties as first speakers When the floor is open to consider the different agenda item before us, this means that when we open an agenda item for consideration, the floor will be given to indigenous peoples and the local communities, followed by parties and then other major groups. Regarding the organization of work, the Executive Secretary, in consultation with the Bureau, proposed the allocation of tasks for the meeting is described in Annex 1 of the annotated agenda contained in document WG8j-12/1/ADD.1 with two small exceptions. First, given the time constraint, I would suggest that we go straight to work on agenda item 3 this morning. For this afternoon, it is proposed that the plenary will then take up both item 4 and 6 concurrently. Item 4 is a progress report, where item 6 relates to the development of the new program of work and institutional arrangement. Item 4 on progress report, document CBD-WG8j-12/3 does not contain any recommendation, and its contents will be updated and submitted to SBI 4 for its consideration. Under item 5 on knowledge management, the working group is invited to focus its consideration on aspects related to traditional knowledge. Therefore, a peer review of the document is established after working group session. The peer review will provide additional opportunities for parties and observers to provide views and comments on the document. Hence, there is no need to have extensive discussion on this. It is my intention this morning to move the agenda item 3 on the in-depth dialogue, and in the afternoon session to have a first reading of item 4 and 6, followed by item 5, time permitting. This will put us in a good position timing-wise to address items 7 and 8 tomorrow morning and leave morning afternoon clear for a contact group should this be needed. I now submit the proposed organization of work for your adoption with this modification. So, DPC, you have the floor. Democratic Republic of Congo.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks for giving us the floor. Thank you also for all of the arrangements that you have just explained to us as regards the organization of our work. Chairman, the rules of procedure state that the parties may take the floor before the indigenous people or local peoples or observers. That's in particular stated by Rule 7. And it says that if any modifications are proposed regarding observers, it requires 3/4 of the members present at the meeting to support such changes or modifications. Chairman, we would therefore like to suggest that you check before proposing any modifications. We do have the agreement of 3/4 of the members concerning the possibility of the indigenous people taking the floor before the state parties. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup for your intervention. Yeah. So with this, we had a bureau meeting yesterday. Some bureau members raised these changes, and we agreed during the bureau member there will be a regional consultation. If there is no objection until midnight of last night, regard there is no objection. We want to practice for this time, but we don't have received any objections from any reason, and all agreed by the bureau only for this meeting. But if you want to continue your objection, we can consider. So the floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair, for giving me the floor again. I would just like to state, as you yourself has said, that there is no objection, apparently, and I would therefore like that to be stated in the minutes of the meeting, and that it be stated as an exceptional measure, and that it cannot be considered as a legal precedent or as any form of jurisprudence for subsequent meetings. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup for your cooperation. So I think your request is quite in line with the rule of procedure of the convention. It is well noted, and also it's also agreed by the bureau that it will be just for this meeting. It will be not a practice for the later meeting to change the convention. So thanks for your flexibility and understanding, and also your defend the rule of the procedure. So if you agreed, I would like to understand there is no objection for this meeting. So the organization of the work is approved. Now I propose to take our work with agenda item 3, which is the in-depth dialogue on the role of language in the intergenerational transmission of traditional knowledge, innovations, and practice. For this agenda item, I would like to invite my indigenous co-chair, Ms. Rubis, to take the lead. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Distinguished delegates, in recent years, a consistent feature of our working group has been the in-depth dialogue. The topic for this session is the role of languages in the intergenerational transmission of traditional knowledge, innovations, and practices. I extend a warm welcome to our esteemed speakers and invite them to take the podium. I hand now to the Secretariat to introduce and facilitate the in-depth dialogue.
Thank you, Co-Chair. In its decision 1043, the Conference of the Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity decided to include a new agenda item for future meetings of the ad hoc, open-ended Intersessional Working Group on Article 8J and related provisions of the Convention, entitled In-Depth Dialogue on Thematic Areas and Other Cross-Cutting Issues. In its decision 1520, the Conference of the Parties decided that the topic for the in-depth dialogue to be held at the 12th meeting of the Working Group would be the role of languages in the intergenerational transmission of traditional knowledge, innovations, and practices. The in-depth dialogue will involve presentations by a panel of experts. I will invite these experts to come to the stage. Mr. Mejia Montalvo, Dr. Yolanda Terran, and Dr. Mohamed Handaine. And I will introduce them more extensively when they have arrived. On the basis of past practice, the outcomes of the in-depth dialogue will be annexed to the report of the meeting. So you, the participants in the dialogue, may wish to consider the following questions. First of all, what roles do Indigenous languages play in the transmission of traditional knowledge for biocultural conservation? Second, what would be the significance of incorporating the revitalization of Indigenous languages into the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework? 3, how can the framework best contribute to supporting the revitalization of Indigenous languages and the intergenerational transmission of traditional knowledge? And 4th, what are the strategies to ensure the prioritization and protection of the intergenerational transmission of traditional knowledge, including spiritual connections to the land, while respecting the rights of Indigenous peoples and local communities within the context of the framework? It's my pleasure now to introduce our speakers who have taken the stage. Each of the presenters will present for up to 7 minutes each, followed by questions from you, the participants, and then further reflections from the speakers. So starting from the far side, we have Mr. Mohamed Handaine, who is the president of the Indigenous Peoples of Africa's Coordinating Committee. He's a member of the Steering Committee of the International Decade of Indigenous Languages, 2022 to 2032 of UNESCO. He's the director of the Center for Historical and Environmental Amazigh Studies and president of the Confederation of Amazigh Associations of Southern Morocco. Thank you, Doctor. Beside him, we have Dr. Yolanda Terran. Dr. Yolanda Terran has been actively engaged in a variety of projects and departments at the University of New Mexico, including the Native American Studies Department. Currently, she serves as part-time faculty at the Native American Studies at Chicano-Chicana Studies. Her research endeavors have covered a wide array of topics, ranging from Indigenous education and languages to Indigenous research in Latin America. Welcome, Doctor. And beside me is Mr. Dario Mejia Montalvo, who belongs to the Indigenous Zenu people of San Andrés Sotavento. He serves as the chair of the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. The Forum, as you know, has actively advocated for the adoption of the International Decade of Indigenous Languages, 2022-2032, and the basic rights of Indigenous peoples. Mr. Mejia Montalvo is a trained political scientist, holding a degree from the National University of Colombia, and he also holds a master's degree in development management from the University of the Autonomous Regions of the Nicaraguan Caribbean Coast. So each of the speakers will have up to 7 minutes for remarks, and we will follow that with questions from the floor. When we take the questions from the floor, I'll ask everyone to be very brief so we can have the maximum participation possible. So, Mr. Mejia Montalvo, I'll give you the floor first.
Señor Presidente.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Madam Co-Chair. First of all, I would like to congratulate you for your appointment to the chairmanship of this meeting and to wish you great success during the upcoming day's work. Distinguished Dr. Kenneth Deere, I would also like to thank you, sir, for the words of harmony that you have spoken this morning. And I'd also like to thank the Secretariat and the Secretariat team for the excellent work done. And I'd also like to greet the state parties and the delegations from the indigenous peoples, and also the distinguished delegations coming from the local communities, as well as United Nations entities. And also I'd like to greet the delegates from the NGOs, members of academia, and other representatives. Of course, also greeting the members of the Permanent Forum present here. And I'd also like to state my thanks to all of those involved in cooperation, as well as my thanks to the Swiss government for being the host country. Your Excellencies, thank you very much for all of this. As we have said previously during the inaugural session of the Permanent Forum this year, for the majority of indigenous peoples, the subject of climate is the language through which the Mother Earth is teaching us the way in which we should take care of life on the planet. The climate teaches us when to sow, when to reap, when to put on warm clothes, when not to do so. It teaches us which plants can deal with certain diseases, or what is the appropriate moment when offering ceremonies should take place for Mother Nature. All of these are the teachings of the Mother Earth through climate. So, in a nutshell, we can say that climate, in a nutshell, is basically the language of Mother Earth. And by seeing accelerated climate cycles and the loss of diversity, what we are seeing is the loss of the major language that we, as members of humanity and other living beings on the earth, have in common. Since the establishment of the Permanent Forum of the United Nations for Indigenous Peoples Matters, we have produced a number of important recommendations so that indigenous peoples can overcome the situation of risk that their languages are faced with. I must say that we have heard some answers. For example, in the Economic Affairs and Social Affairs Department of the United Nations, there were 2 meetings held by the expert group on indigenous languages. One of those meetings was held in 2008, and the other one held in 2016. Subsequently, the General Assembly proclaimed the year 2019 as the International Year for Indigenous Languages, and subsequently, the International Decade for Indigenous Languages was proclaimed for 2022 to 2032, and that is the period in which we are right now. Although at an international level, the tools for protection and dissemination of indigenous languages has been developed in a very gradual way, we still are faced with major challenges at a national level. There is a growing demand on the part of the indigenous peoples so that the member states will be able to address the subject of risk at which indigenous languages are posed. And this, of course, involves intercultural bilingual education as one of the tools to address the context. And this, in turn, involves the adequate financing for the protection of languages, for transborder cooperation, for the protection of indigenous languages, and also information technologies and communication in order to produce a protective environment for languages and also to protect linguistic diversity. The Kunming-Montreal Global Diversity Framework recognizes the contribution of indigenous peoples as the custodians of biodiversity. The indigenous peoples' rights and knowledges associated to biodiversity, to innovation, vision, and other practical matters involve also the use of practical and native languages that contain the codes for these knowledge systems. Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, linguistic diversity is not something that concerns just the indigenous peoples. The words themselves are spirits. Their diverse forms, their wealth, their richness are part of the heritage of humanity. Every word that is lost in any language is a loss for all of humanity. Therefore, the protection and revitalization of indigenous languages allow for the representation of various different visions of the world, as well as different values and experiences in taking care of life. These languages are essential components of the living heritage of humanity, as well as of the transfer of knowledge from one generation to another. At present, we are confronted with tremendous challenges. We have all been able to see that in different regions of the world, there has been an increase in hate speech against the indigenous peoples, usually using corporate communication channels that use the freedom of the press argument or freedom of expression argument in order to conduct this sad form of communication. It is therefore urgent for campaigns and dialogue to take place in order to compensate the negative impact that this has had throughout various different regions. To conclude, and as we've seen in this morning's opening ceremony, we've seen that each language contains the necessary codes to establish relationship with different territories. So this way, the correlation between life, human beings, and other living beings is something that is contained within all of these languages. So, from this holistic perspective of life and its content, we need to make sure that it is included in the knowledge production systems, in the work programs, and in the challenges that the Biodiversity Convention is faced with. From this perspective, the Permanent Forum has insisted on a number of recommendations whose purpose is to contribute to the work that states and United Nations agencies are undertaking in the area of biodiversity and that are indeed related to the indigenous peoples in a specific manner. The Decade for Indigenous Languages, which we are presently initiating, not just aims at ensuring the survival of the indigenous peoples or the recovery of such languages, but it also provides a strengthening of the use of the indigenous peoples' languages in an appropriate manner and in all of the United Nations entities. So I would like, in a constructive spirit, for you to welcome all of the recommendations that the Permanent Forum has produced and will continue producing in relation to this very important process, which is of vital importance for each and every one of us in any corner of the world. Thank you very much for giving me the floor.
Thank you very, very much for your remarks. Words themselves are spirits and are part of the heritage of humanity. That's a very interesting phrase, a very good phrase to hear. I now invite Dr. Yolanda Terran to deliver remarks to the group. Yolanda.
Alipunja, Mashikuna, Nyuka, Yolanda Terran, Mecani, Ecuador, Mamayactamanta. Agradezco por la invitación.
I would like to express my gratitude for being invited to participate on the dialogue on indigenous languages and also the intergenerational transmission of traditional knowledges as well as innovation and practices. For indigenous peoples, indigenous languages are part of our culture and of our identity as well as part of our life, because through our languages we are able to express who we are, what our thoughts are, what our feelings are, and what our beings are. Indigenous languages are transmitted orally from one generation to another. They are a means of communication, and they are a repository of traditions, traditional knowledge, and also our connection with Mother Earth. They also transmit our life history, which is sometimes only recorded in the memory of our elders. We use these languages to pray, to sing, to dance, and to tell our own stories, as well as to express the values of the women and the men in our society and the roles that they play in our day-to-day life. Indigenous languages refer to sacred places, to certain codes as well, to certain events, to the properties and interrelations among things. The languages express knowledge, beliefs, and attitudes, as well as technologies and sciences, as well as the cosmovision that our ancestors developed for hundreds of years. Our languages are fundamental in order to understand values, ideologies, and other intangible aspects related to culture. Our languages are associated to greeting, to legislation, to literature, to proverbs, to dreams, to jokes, to knowledge, to symbols, to metaphors, and to different situations. Among the indigenous peoples, a song or a story or an item of medicinal knowledge is intrinsically correlated to human beings, to animals, to plants, and to specific places. Our indigenous languages are also related to land tenancy and to a safe and healthy environment. If a given environment is not secure, then the language will decrease, and this is something we will see as something that endangers the language and the culture itself. Our languages are deeply bound to the food systems, to the land and the territories and the waters, as well as to traditional knowledge, as well as to ecosystems and ecological processes, as well as to the vulnerable ecosystems. Our languages are unique because they represent a complete microcosm with their own linguistic properties. It's a singular cosmovision, a form of spirituality, ethics, and community among those who speak the language. The languages are vulnerable because they exist in the macrocosm of the dominant languages. In our indigenous languages, we also have embedded knowledge, ideas, and concepts. We always say that everything is interrelated, interbound, and that is why within my own culture, when we speak of chakra, it doesn't just mean the original word or seed, but it also refers to the cycles of the moon, the sun, the cycles of the earth. It refers to ceremonies. It refers to the correlations of solidarity and to the redistribution of our food production. It speaks about the interrelation between human beings and the Mother Earth. We speak a lot about seeds, about native seeds, about our seeds and the ceremonies related to the seeds, and about the correlation between indigenous women and men when we speak about the agricultural cycle. In the framework of the Decade for Indigenous Languages and the work program and the various areas or issues considered by UNESCO in regard to indigenous peoples and languages, for example, Article 3 and 31 of the Human Rights Declaration on Indigenous Peoples. In the framework of the new global framework for biodiversity, it is imperative that we work jointly in recognizing our human rights, in the security of land tenancy and applying to our territories and our waters, and also the very important role played by indigenous women in teaching and in conveying indigenous languages to future generations, also in the generation and application of intercultural linguistic policies, and in the assigning of financial resources, as well as in the drafting of programs and activities that are culturally appropriate and designed for and by the indigenous peoples. It is also important that we take into account the enhancing of the value and use of indigenous languages and also the various dialects through the registration of indigenous languages, the writing of language books, and the conducting of diagnosis or the state of play of the real status of indigenous languages. We also need to recover the cultural domains of languages in all of the day-to-day activities through the free and educated consent and the full participation of the indigenous peoples and local communities with women and children and youth involved. It is important, necessary that we take into account the fact that recovery of indigenous languages, it also has to do with the forgiveness and our reconciliation with the Mother Earth. It has to do with the restoration of earth and water and river systems. We need to remember that we have to heal a lot, and the recovery of our languages and cultures, as well as the application of the new global biodiversity framework, will have to be conducted within the sacred circle and in a framework of respect, acceptance, inclusion, trust, cooperation, and social and environmental justice. Thank you very much for giving me the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Terán. Languages are related to places, and recovery of language also has to do with forgiveness and reconciliation with Mother Earth and restoration. That's a point that really struck with me. It's my pleasure now to invite Dr. Handaine to speak to the floor. Doctor, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. I am Mohamed Handain from Morocco. I would like firstly to thank the CBD for having invited me to participate in this meeting, which is of great import. It is a great pleasure for me to share with you my experience of more than 30 years of working in the sphere of indigenous peoples' languages. Ladies and gentlemen, the results that we see in Section C of the global framework is the subject that we are deliberating on today. And it is the fruit of labor, a peaceful struggle of more than 100 years, each day a new day of struggle. In 1923, the head of the Iroquois Nation League, which represents the Confederation of the Six Nations, as we heard earlier, leaves Canada for a mission here in Geneva. And the head of that work began a labor which did not end and continues on today. The indigenous peoples of the world were able to convince the international community of the import of the first memory of humanity, that is, traditional knowledge. The world has understood that it needs, now more than ever, wisdom from indigenous people. The indigenous view of the world allows us to thwart the destructive processes of mankind and of man's civilization. Indigenous knowledge includes languages, writing, philosophy based on the respect of nature. Ladies and gentlemen, indigenous people have a roadmap today, including the 169 Convention, the Paris Accord, and the Global Framework on Biodiversity. All of these agreements have major work underpinning them from the sweat and labor of indigenous peoples. However, this work will be for naught if there isn't a domestic and national application. The majority of these agreements and conventions focus on the importance of traditional knowledge to preserve biodiversity. But we don't see that same focus placed on indigenous languages. It would be seeming as if we're talking of water and rivers without speaking of the very source of such rivers. If a language disappears, then traditional knowledge automatically also disappears. Indigenous languages and traditional knowledge are part and parcel of each other. Section C, therefore, of the Global Framework and Target 21 are for us a framework and basis for work for the application of what we're doing in indigenous language in the transmission of indigenous knowledge to preserve biodiversity. It is through languages that the indigenous woman transmits to her indigenous children the respect of nature. It's through practice. It's teaching children lessons and ways in which we handle cattle, plants, what have you. For example, in Chad in Africa, the Ombulu transmit to their guides a oral map of how they use different corridors and different passages. It's incredibly detailed. And they also speak of birds' flight patterns. In Amazon women's tribes in Amazonia, they use their languages to speak of the forest, which is, of course, today's universal patrimony. So, traditional knowledge, ladies and gentlemen, are not just practices. They are also an entire system which is based on the accumulation of experience, which is passed down through history generation from generation or generation to generation. And this extraordinary system must be taken into account in its as a whole. The global framework, therefore, will be an extraordinary opportunity to revitalize and reinvigorate the application of these indigenous languages and make the process of taking into consideration these different parts more focused. There will be a direct link between the transmission of indigenous languages and the application of the global framework. By means of conclusion, I ask, what will be the strategy which will allow us to give priority to intergenerational transmission of indigenous knowledge? No matter what the strategy is, it won't be efficient if it isn't implemented hand in hand together with indigenous peoples, and the results will not be satisfactory. So the International Decade of Indigenous Languages 2022 to 2032 is also an historic opportunity to promote and preserve these indigenous languages. In our region, for example, there are exemplary experiences of protecting indigenous languages. These should be explored and encouraged. We should officialize, for example, Amazonian languages in Algeria and Morocco. We are therefore faced with the vast expanse of national change and shifts. For example, firstly, in the legislative area, in order to adopt a fitting national legislation which aligns with the global framework. There needs to be recognition of indigenous languages and the promotion thereof. In this framework, as part of the implementation of this framework, rather, and as part of its application, there are two key urgent actions. Domestically, we must establish a national registry of traditional knowledge, establish a database, if you will, of traditional knowledge with a codification by country. Traditional knowledge, which would be codified and registered, could therefore be shared at a national level domestically. Now internationally, Chair, a database, international in nature, which would also list traditional knowledge. Those must be inscribed with the CBD Secretariat. In connection with this data, it should be linked to the state parties. So therefore, you would have a link between the domestic database and the CBD international database. If this were to exist, it would allow for a true and extraordinary exchange of experiences of indigenous peoples throughout the world. And this would therefore guarantee the right to use this traditional knowledge of indigenous peoples. Ladies and gentlemen, it is with good faith that indigenous peoples and all stakeholders will come together to contribute to the framework for biodiversity. And this is a historic challenge for all of humanity. I thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very, very much, Doctor. Thank you for reminding us that 100 years ago here in Geneva, these issues were indeed advanced, which is very exciting to hear. Also, thank you for your question of the opportunities of the framework and the concrete examples of ways to move forward. We now open the floor to questions from the assembled delegates. Please make your request by pushing the buttons as instructed by my colleagues, and we'll give you the floor. I would ask that any comments or statements be brief, 2 minutes each if possible, maybe 3, so that we can have the maximum participation possible. So the floor is open. I see a request from IPLC 1. You should have the floor now, please.
I speak on behalf of the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity. I'd like to start by congratulating June Rubis for her election as a co-chair of the working group 8J, and we are confident that she and the co-chair will make this meeting a success. Languages take a central role in the intergenerational transmission of traditional knowledge, innovation, and practices underpinning indigenous peoples and local communities' cultural values, identity, and governance systems for generations. The number of speakers of indigenous languages is an important indicator of ecosystem health. There is abundant evidence showing the direct relationship between cultural vitality and biological diversity. Indigenous languages also provide a window into the gendered aspects of human-nature interaction, offering diverse perspectives on biodiversity conservation and unique insights into stewardship and practices. The IIFB emphasizes the important role of women, particularly indigenous mothers and grandmothers, who welcome us to Mother Earth with the first words in our languages. The United Nations General Assembly has declared the International Decade of Indigenous Languages from 2022 to 2032 to draw attention to the critical status of many indigenous languages across the world and to encourage concrete action for the preservation, revitalization, and promotion of the intergenerational transmission of these languages. The IIFB recalls the decision 15/22 of the Conference of the Party on Nature and Culture, which adopted the elements and tasks related to the joint program of work on the links between biological and cultural diversity. The IIFB welcomes the draft recommendations with small changes. The IIFB suggests that in the preamble, the beginning paragraph could read, recognizing the International Decade of Indigenous Languages 2022 and 2033. In the third paragraph of the preamble, which noted Target 22, after the words "the Conference of Parties," the IIFB proposes to use the exact language from Target 21, so the text will read, further noting that in Target 21 of the framework, the Conference of the Parties called for the best available data, information, and knowledge are accessible to decision makers, practitioners, and the public to guide effective and equitable governance, integrated and participatory management of biodiversity, and to strengthen communication, awareness raising, education, monitoring, research, and knowledge management. And also in this context, traditional knowledge, innovations, practices, and technologies of indigenous peoples and local communities should only be accessed with free, prior, and informed consent.
Would the distinguished speaker please speak more slowly? Please, more slowly.
Preamble. At the
My
end of the
apologies,
paragraph,
distinguished delegate. The interpreters have asked that you speak a little more slowly. You have a very rich commentary that they want to capture. Thank you.
Thank you. In the paragraph 4 of the preamble, at the end of the paragraph after the words, living in harmony with nature, we propose adding, and emphasizing the need of making indigenous concepts, cosmovisions, and epistemologies more understandable for parties and all actors involved in the CBD process. In the 6th paragraph of the preamble, the IIFB recommends to end the sentence after the joint program of work on the links between biological and cultural diversity and delete the rest of the text and adopt the text in Target 21. And after that, we propose to add a new sentence that reads, parties should continue to implement the United Nations Resolution A/74/396 of International Decade of Indigenous Languages 2022 to 2032, when the decision and new program of work on Article 8J will be adopted by COP16. The IIFB also emphasizes the need for a more comprehensive indigenous action-led research on the links between languages, cultures, and biodiversity. The IIFB supports the theme of the text of the next in-depth dialogue with the strategies for mobilizing resources to ensure direct access to funding by indigenous peoples and local communities, to support the implementation of the Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which could contribute to the implementation of Target 19. The IIFB suggests adequate financial mechanisms. We have submitted our recommendations in writing and request support for our recommendations from the parties. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. Thank you, IIFB, for your remarks. And yes, noted that we have received these in writing. I now give the floor to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. DRC, you have the floor.
Merci, monsieur.
Thank you very much, Chair, for giving me the floor. And allow me to also thank the representative of the indigenous peoples and local communities for their statements, and allow me to also thank the experts from the panel who have shared interesting elements with regard to the importance of languages in the transmission of traditional knowledge and indigenous know-how. Now, if I may, there are a number of things which have been said with regard mainly to the role and the importance of languages in transmitting knowledge. There are recommendations which were created in order to elaborate domestic registries of traditional knowledge and indigenous knowledge, and also there are recommendations that have been made on the establishment of a database on traditional knowledge and indigenous peoples' knowledge. Two small questions which I'm wondering here. First of all, what are the main threats which traditional knowledge and know-how and indigenous people's knowledge and languages are facing? Because when we think about threats, if we're able to identify threats, then we would be able to resolve the issue of those threats. Second question. We have seen that indigenous peoples and local communities, even though they participate in the preservation of biodiversity and the sustainable use of resources in a major way, they have still been left out with regard to access to financing. So, what is the mechanism which will allow us to promote and facilitate their direct access, the direct access of local communities and indigenous peoples to financing, to help them preserve their languages, their know-how, and their traditions, their cultures? And at the end of the day, what are the provisions that are going to be taken specifically by IPES in order to document those traditional knowledge, know-how in different reports, for example, which are going to be evaluated either internationally, regionally, or thematically? Lastly, as the DRC, we support the statement that has been made by indigenous peoples and by local communities. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Democratic Republic of Congo. So I'll ask the panelists to note those questions, and when we come back to you, it'll be good to get replies from you. Thank you very, very much. I now recognize South Africa and give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. South Africa sees languages as a reflection of society. Languages also act as a repository of society's history, as vehicle of cultural transmission, and as transmission of indigenous knowledge. Therefore, development of laws and policies to promote, protect, and preserve languages is essential. A recognition of languages should not only focus on spoken languages, but also unspoken ones, because recognition enhances provision of resources and capacity building. Documentation of languages is also key to making sure that languages are not lost. More and more languages are evolving, and that there is need to accommodate new languages. With regard to the recommendations to COP16, we are proposing an additional preambular paragraph, which will come after the first preambular, which reads, noting that through languages, indigenous peoples and local communities preserve their community's history, customs and traditions, memory, unique modes of thinking, meaning, and expression. And with regard to the proposed topic for the next in-depth dialogue, we propose the inclusion of women and youth in the topic in order to recognize their important role and contributions in supporting the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. So with our inclusion, the topic will now read, strategies for mobilizing resources to ensure direct access to funding by women, youth, and indigenous peoples and local communities to support the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. We'll submit our proposals in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, South Africa, and indeed we'll look forward to receiving those proposals from you in writing. I now give the floor to Guatemala. Guatemala, the mic is yours.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would like to congratulate you for the excellent job done in the context of the present negotiations. Our mother tongue is the major vehicle for communication amongst people, and through our mother language, we express our thoughts, we express our feelings, and in general, our own perspective of life or our cosmovision. For this reason, mother tongues should be used in every public and private exchange or entity. On that account, Guatemala has a national language law encouraging the recognition, the respect, the promotion, the development, and the use of the Maya people's languages and also the Inca people's languages. Although it is true that as a country we are still confronted with challenges and difficulties in the implementation of this measure, we consider that encouraging the use of indigenous languages within the World Kunming-Montreal framework and including languages also within the new Article 8J work program is something that strengthens our own commitment as a country in order to continue working on the efforts of indigenous peoples and bringing them all together in the preservation and sustainable use of biological diversity. In this connection, we support the proposal that has been stated by the indigenous peoples. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Guatemala. I now recognize Brazil. And pardon me just a moment. I'm pleased to give the floor to the distinguished representative, the National Secretary of Indigenous, Environmental, and Territorial Management of the Ministry of Indigenous Peoples of Brazil. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. In Brazil, we have more than 300 indigenous peoples and over 200 languages. As language is one of the main features defining the identity and cultural traits of an indigenous people, we need public policies that ensure the preservation of this cultural trait. We also have other indigenous peoples who had the right to language taken away by the process of colonization. Bearing those considerations in mind, Brazil has a permanent national policy of ensuring the right to culture and identity. The languages that are preserved and revered are also important tools to value the traditional knowledge that indigenous peoples have about their territory. There are rituals, medicines, festivities, sustainable extractivism practice, ways of plowing, and practice for forest preservation, as well as expressions of biodiversity knowledge and ways of relating to them, which are only expressed in an integrated manner through this cosmology and linguistic expression of indigenous peoples. Those indigenous peoples who no longer speak their language have to seek ways to reinterpret things as a way of preserving knowledge. Thus, we understand that language preservation is a fundamental element of indigenous life that best preserves biodiversity. Considering that IPLCs communicate and pass on traditional knowledge through cosmology and indigenous languages, this convention and other agreements aimed at biodiversity conservation should pay close attention to these peoples who protect 80% of biodiversity and ensure that their cosmology can be integrated into the dynamics of the convention. Therefore, the first action is to ensure diverse participation and presence with indigenous peoples from all regions, including by strengthening and expanding the participation of indigenous representatives in national delegations. Brazil is setting an example with the establishment of the Ministry of Indigenous Peoples and ensuring its participation in discussions. However, it is not enough for Brazil alone. It must be a commitment of the entire convention community. The second action is through financing language preservation efforts. A partnership between UNESCO and the Conventional Biological Diversity within the International Decade of Indigenous Languages can bring about many structuring actions to strengthen the preservation of languages, worldviews, territories, and biodiversity. There are already many concrete actions under the International Decade, and this partnership can unlock much more. Thank you.
Brazil. I give the floor now to the European Union.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Since it's the first time that I take the floor, I would first of all like to state my thanks to the government of Switzerland as well as to the city of Geneva for acting as a host to us these days and also for making it possible to hold this very important meeting. I'd also like to take advantage of this first intervention in order to say that during this event, all our interventions, in other words, those made by the Spanish delegation, will be made on behalf of the European Union and its 27 member states. Chair, I would also like, before anything else, to express my gratitude and my congratulations to the three speakers for their very interesting statements, and also for sharing with us their knowledge as well as their experience in the various regional contexts, and in particular as regards the role and the potential of indigenous languages. Dear co-chairs, dear colleagues, the European Union and its member states welcome this in-depth dialogue as an opportunity for sharing practices about strengthening of intergenerational transmission of traditional knowledge and the important role of indigenous languages for customary sustainable governance and management of biodiversity. The theme of the in-depth dialogue is indeed very timely, considering the ongoing proclaimed decade of indigenous languages from 2022 to 2032, and the importance of supporting and nurturing the revitalization of indigenous languages for the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. The Sami people are the indigenous peoples of Sapmi. Their territories cross over the borders between Finland, Sweden, Norway, and Russia. There are several Sami languages, and the rich vocabulary of the Sami languages when it comes to describing landscape, animals, nature, and weather conditions illustrates the intimate connection between language, culture, and nature. In a Sami context, language is the foremost condition to express the responsibility in maintaining the ecological balance in nature. The Sami languages are a prerequisite and a necessary tool to preserve Sami traditional knowledge and transmit it from one generation to another. The language maintains continuity in times of cultural change. Loss of use of indigenous languages and loss of intergenerational transmission makes it more difficult, at times impossible, to pass on the vital knowledge on how to conserve our environment and live in harmony with nature. Thus, it is critical to support the use and revitalization of indigenous languages as part and means for the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Last of all, Chairman, we would like to express our support for the proposals that we heard by the International Indigenous Peoples Forum for Biodiversity. Thank you very much, co-chairs, for giving me the floor.
Thank you very much, European Union. And your support for the intervention by the IFB is indeed noted. The floor is now to Mexico. Mexico, please.
Muy buenos días.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you very much for giving us the floor. I would first like to thank and congratulate the Bureau for organizing this meeting, and also thank our friends from the Bureau, wishing them all that they have an excellent opportunity to work and make progress in the next few days. I would also like to thank the host country, that is to say Switzerland, for welcoming us so warmly and with such great hospitality. Chair, I'd like to share with you the fact that recently in Mexico, we have published a number of freely accessible textbooks which are used for the basic education of our children. And these books have been published in 64 of the 68 languages in our country. This is an action that is very much in line of the recognition of the importance of languages and the importance of the mother tongue as a means of recognizing the knowledge that our ancestors have passed on, that our communities and indigenous peoples have passed on. More than ever, today, in the face of the biodiversity crisis, the pollution crisis, and the climate crisis, and the desertification and the dearth of water that our planet is faced with, all these languages show us that recognizing these languages is also recognizing the knowledge and the know-how that exist among our indigenous peoples. This is something that allows us to access to forms of knowledge that had already existed in the past, but that had been forgotten, and that these forms of knowledge can help us confront and solve some of these problems that are ailing our planet. In this connection, I would like to repeat that our country is giving a new level of value to language and reinterpreting our traditions vis-à-vis the indigenous peoples. And we are bringing their knowledge into our own educational system. This is part of the endeavor, not just with a view to integrating them into the educational system, but actually making sure that their knowledge becomes part of the generation of knowledge and is brought into knowledge generation, not just at the basic education level, but also in different levels in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mexico. I now give the floor to Argentina. Argentina, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Argentina would like to thank the Secretariat for preparing the document for the basic dialogue on the role of language and its role in the intergenerational transmission of traditional knowledge, innovation, and practices. We will be guiding our intervention on the basis of the various issues that have been put on the table. Argentina would like first and foremost to refer to the importance of indigenous languages in the intergenerational transmission of traditional knowledge, transmission of innovation and practices. Intergenerational transmission and the survival of traditional knowledge, the use of medicinal plants, and their spiritual connotations is something that is intimately bound to the culture and indigenous language. Likewise, Argentina would like to underscore the role of the transmission by one generation to the other in the biocultural conservation. By naming the indigenous peoples in their own language, all of the elements of their environment and their own existence, the indigenous people show their deep knowledge and the functioning that they have acquired by living on these territories. The objectives of the Biodiversity Kunming-Montreal framework are intimately bound to the protection of the indigenous territories and guaranteeing their permanence on their territories with their systems of knowledge and systems of communication is something that will result in the benefit of biodiversity conservation. Languages form part of our thoughts. And by naming the components of our territory biodiversity in the way that it is named by the indigenous people, this has a value that is related to the experience and observation of many generations throughout their territory and its components. In this connection, revitalizing languages is something that is very important in order to make the best out of the value of this accumulated knowledge. Argentina considers that the global framework is something that can contribute to revitalizing the indigenous languages, as well as the intergenerational transmission of traditional knowledge through the promotion and articulation of the participation of indigenous peoples in the discussions of the national biodiversity strategies by addressing the objectives of the World Framework in their own languages. An in-depth dialogue is something that is of extreme importance in order to include Article 8J and related provisions in the work that is conducted within the framework of the Convention. After the historic adoption of the Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Global Convention, it is necessary to address the challenges that implementation poses. In this connection, for the next dialogue, Argentina suggests the subject, which is strategies for the participation of indigenous peoples and local communities in the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Framework in line with the national action plans and strategies of biological diversity. Last of all, Chair, Argentina has some brief suggestions on the recommendation text, and we will be providing these in writing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Argentina, and looking forward to receiving those comments from you in writing. Thank you so much. Norway, you have the floor.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Norway takes this opportunity to recognize the contributions we have heard so far from the panel of experts, the contribution of the IAFB, as well as the rich exchange between parties we have heard so far, including from the EU and Argentina. We also welcome the proposed decision. Now, in response to the 4 questions before us in this in-depth dialogue, Norway thinks these are best illustrated by a couple of statements from the Sami parliament in Norway. Those highlight the importance of maintaining traditional livelihoods and the involvement of traditional knowledge in the management of biodiversity. So, Sami livelihoods are important carriers of Sami languages, Sami culture and societal life. Within reindeer herding, fisheries, agriculture and the use of common property lands, there is a rich, living and diverse language covering specific terminologies. A large part of this terminology is specific to these livelihoods and form part of a Sami traditional knowledge. With societal change happening at a fast pace, this has an impact also on Sami livelihoods. Language carriers in traditional Sami livelihoods contain important knowledge about Sami languages, traditions, and values. Sami languages have traditionally held a strong position, especially within these primary livelihoods, and conversely, these livelihoods have played important roles as carriers of Sami languages and transmission of traditional knowledge across generations. The functions of traditional Sami livelihoods as carriers, transmitters, and arenas for learning and maintenance of Sami languages must therefore be strengthened. Traditional Sami livelihoods represent a life form based on strong cultural elements, including family, kinship, and descent. These livelihoods serve to maintain Sami languages, values, and traditions, and to maintain, develop, and transmit traditional knowledge. More specifically, reindeer herding is one of the most important carriers of Sami languages. The South Sami language, one of 6, is particularly exposed to the societal and cultural change we have heard about and has been placed on UNESCO's list of languages threatened with extinction. Continued reindeer herding in the South Sami areas, therefore, is of particular importance to maintain the South Sami language and culture. The Sami Parliament would like to underline the importance that language carriers in Sami livelihoods are used actively to maintain Sami languages in both formal and informal arenas. This applies in particular with regard to Sami kindergartens, primary schools, and educational guidance and materials. The Sami Parliament also wants to draw attention to the need to give visibility, use, and implementation of Sami traditional knowledge in the institutions and practices of nature management, including in national implementation of the new Global Biodiversity Framework. This should happen in close cooperation with Sami institutions for maintenance of traditional knowledge, Sami communities, and rights holders. The Sami Parliament therefore expects to see improved status of Sami traditional knowledge and improved practices with regard to taking account of indigenous peoples' traditional knowledge in decision-making within management of biodiversity. In this area too, there is need to identify ways and institutions to transmit knowledge from generation to generation so that Sami traditional knowledge is maintained as a living repository for a changing world. While the Norwegian delegation does not, of course, speak on behalf of the Sami Parliament, we do take this opportunity to thank them for the opportunity to present their views on the importance of maintaining traditional livelihoods and involvement of traditional knowledge in the management of biodiversity as ways to ensure transmission of traditional knowledge, innovations, and practices between generations. Norway, on its own behalf, is in the process of updating our National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan in response to the new Global Biodiversity Framework. We are in dialogue with the Sami Parliament to ensure their full and effective participation in this process. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your statement, Norway, and for communicating the messages from the Sami Parliament. Egypt, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I would like to join all of the previous speakers who thanked the Secretariat for preparation of such important dialogue, which is very rich with many things. Having said that, I have 3 major clarifications that I'm asking the experts. Number 1, as we know, languages are means of communication. Communication between ourselves and nature in some way or another. How the languages are related to the religions. In our religion, for example, all what is already said this morning are in our religion, Islam and Quran, everything that you may think about, that you cannot believe it. It is very clear, everything is stated very clear in religion. So language and communication, language and religion. Second question is, How can you sustain this traditional knowledge against what is happening now? I'm referring to globalization. Globalization makes it very, very difficult for young generation to cope with languages. Number three, what's the relations between the traditional knowledge and innovation? How can we innovate this traditional knowledge in a way that they can implement much better in GBF and many, many other programs? Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Egypt, for those questions. Thank you. We'll try to get back to the panel for those questions. I now will give the floor to New Zealand. New Zealand, please.
Thank you, Chair. As this is the first time New Zealand has taken the floor, we would like to thank the Swiss government for hosting us this week, as well as the Secretariat for the preparatory work. We acknowledge the importance of the focus topic of the in-depth dialogue, and we thank the panelists for the excellent presentations on the focus topic. Chair, the Indigenous language of Aotearoa New Zealand is a precious treasure and integral to the stewardship of land, oceans, and resources by reflecting the relationship between Māori, the Indigenous peoples of New Zealand, and the natural world. The rights of Māori and the obligations of the New Zealand government are set out in Article 2 of the Treaty of Waitangi, which guarantees Māori the right to exercise their exclusive chieftainship over their land, homes, and their treasures. We see in the summary of submissions that language revitalization is essential for the intergenerational transmission of traditional knowledge, and note the relevance for the implementation of national biodiversity strategies and plans. Chair, it is vital to ensure the use of traditional knowledge of Indigenous peoples is subject to their free, prior, and informed consent. It is also important to ensure that the holders of traditional knowledge decision makers, especially in relation to language revitalization. To that end, we are supportive of the proposal made by IFB, in particular in relation to the third preambular paragraph. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very, very much, New Zealand, and noted your support for those parts of the proposal of the IFB. Australia, the floor is yours.
Thank you to our three presenters for sharing their knowledge on this important issue and starting this important exchange of views and experiences from across the world. Australia acknowledges the important role that language plays in the transmission of traditional knowledge over generations, that language and traditional knowledge are indivisible, and that language and traditional knowledge play a critical role in the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework and delivering on the objectives of the Convention. We also acknowledge UNESCO's work as the lead agency on initiatives to preserve, revitalise and promote Indigenous languages. Language is not limited to words conveyed by speech. It has a human regenerative function. It extends to listening to the purposeful voice of the land and its attributes. Australia further acknowledges the role of the songlines that form the narrative of Australian Indigenous cultures and the enactment of these as vehicles for the practice and preservation of traditional knowledge of our Aboriginal and Torres Strait peoples. Songlines can define the land that Indigenous people live on, linking locations in vast landscapes with memory, creating spoken knowledge systems. With the displacement of Indigenous peoples from their ancestral lands, many of these systems have become vulnerable, damaged, or lost. We must work to counter this. Australia's Indigenous protected areas are areas of land and sea that Australia's Indigenous peoples have agreed to manage for biodiversity conservation. These areas represent 50% of Australia's protected areas network. The Australian government is providing $231.5 million over 5 years from July this year to continue and to improve the Indigenous Protected Areas program. Australia's Indigenous Ranger program supports Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders to apply traditional knowledge in land management and promote the passing of knowledge from community elders to the younger generations. Combined, these programs have demonstrated invaluable social and environmental outcomes. For example, the reciprocal relationship with Indigenous peoples and their land is demonstrated in traditional land and fire management, which has seen the restoration of native plants and animals that were thought to have been lost. An evaluation is currently underway to assess the extent to which the IPA program objectives are being achieved, and Australia looks forward to sharing these lessons moving forward. Australia supports the draft recommendations with one suggested amendment to recommendation 1 to, put this into context of the scope of the convention, and we will submit this proposed text change in writing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Australia, for your comments, for your examples of work in your territories. I give the floor to Chad now. Chad, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair, for giving me the floor. I would like firstly to congratulate the Secretariat on the work that it's done. No small feat. I'd also like to thank the different speakers for having given information which was rich in nature, specifically the links which they've established between Indigenous languages and the preservation of biodiversity. In Chad, Indigenous languages were always considered as a means of transmitting values and habits. There is, of course, no doubt today that Indigenous languages play an important role in the preservation of biodiversity. I would like to draw attention to the Saharan band, which, of course, is experiencing much difficulty in preserving biodiversity due to desertification and climate change. Indigenous peoples have a circular knowledge which needs to be preserved in this area. I would like to quote Dr. Mohamed Mandan, who spoke of the Mbubirotshi people of Chad, who have circular knowledge that they transmit from generation to generation. And I would like to add the Guran people and the Arab nomad people, who are last but not least. I would also like to ask a question, if I may. Today, have we already registered all Indigenous peoples throughout the world? Is that something that exists as a list or registry? And then, lastly, Chad subscribes to the statement that has been made by Indigenous peoples. I thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Chad. Thank you for your comments and your questions to the panel. The Dominican Republic, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. Giving a voice to those who live in harmony with nature, and speaking today on behalf of the Dominican Republic and also as an active member of GRULAC, I am now coming before this distinguished assembly in order to underscore the importance of the conservation of biodiversity, not just as a universal mandate, but as a deep compromise for the future, and in particular for the future of our Caribbean region. In the Dominican Republic, we deeply understand the fact that biodiversity is more than just an asset of nature. It is the stone that holds up the rest of our diversity and also our ecological diversity. Our systems from the majestic Duarte Mountain, the highest mountain in the Caribbean, all the way to the depths of the Caribbean Sea, is something that is not just a natural resource, but it is a global treasure that we are committed to preserve for ourselves and for the world. Therefore, we fervently ask for the full participation of Indigenous peoples and local communities in each and every aspect of decision-making as anything related to biodiversity. We recognize that women and Indigenous girls are frequently the custodians of our ancestral knowledge and that they should therefore play a leading role in this dialogue. Their ancestral knowledge is of primordial importance in order to confront the present challenges of conservation and also the sustainable use of our natural gifts. We call for an enlargement of the dialogue and for integration of all the working groups and cooperation in exchanging knowledge and practices in order to have effective implementation at a basic level. The Dominican Republic recognizes the very valuable opportunity in linking traditional knowledge indicators within the monitoring framework for biodiversity. This is something that reflects our own efforts and progress in a more precise manner and in a significant way. Furthermore, we underscore the need to mobilize and increase in a substantial way the financial resources, because it's crucial that indigenous peoples and local communities, and in particular our women and our youth, to have free access to these funds so that this can strengthen their role as custodians of biodiversity. Last of all, Chair, our own regional ethos leads us to request the assignation of 20% of the funds of the Global Environment Fund for local communities and indigenous peoples. This is not just a gesture of support, but bears witness to the important role that they play in regard to our natural heritage, which is the support for our region and supports our planet as well. Furthermore, Chair, the Dominican Republic is passionately committed to the integration of the ancestral knowledge of our local communities in the fabric of our region and our vision of biodiversity. We recognize this knowledge as an invaluable tool in order to shed light and to guide our future generations. Our vision, Chairman, is to embed sustainability in the DNA of our national culture, as a way of respecting and establishing harmony with nature in future undertakings. The Dominican Republic firmly commits to work together with GRULAC and the global community in order to ensure the future of biodiversity and its prosperity, and this with a view to present and future generations. We would like to thank the government of Switzerland and also thank the members of CBD for undertaking this important initiative of actually hearing the voice of those who actually do protect biodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Dominican Republic. Thank you. Côte d'Ivoire, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Secretary. Côte d'Ivoire would like to greet the entire hall and to thank the different speakers for their interventions. Mr. Secretary, there is no doubt that our languages are means and vehicles of transmitting knowledge to preserve our inheritance, our cultural patrimony. Everyone recognizes this. We ourselves have actually lived and experienced this context, this climate, where our parents gave to us our own languages, taught them to us. But today, the world is leading us to a combination and a melting pot of languages at a time when this melting pot of languages should be a melting pot of diversity, but instead it's actually the contrary that we're bearing witness to. Our languages are being used less and less, learned less and less by our own children. current generations, future generations. Each generation seems to be less and less inclined to speak those languages, our languages. And I hope that you would agree with me on this, on these facts. So the question that I'm thinking here is the following. The proposals that have been made, for example, to identify these different languages and these different pieces of know-how, we agree with those proposals. But does that go far enough? Will that allow our future generations and current ones to better take ownership and use those languages? These are languages which are tools, which allow us to understand certain practices. Today, what strategies exist? What are the strategies that we're proposing to pass down these languages and a better ownership of these languages? That's the question that I have. That's a concern that I'm dealing with. How can we make sure that these languages will not only be identified, once identified, that they will be actually used, understood, learned, and transmitted to future generations? I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Before I turn to the next statement, I just want to ask for further interventions. Try to keep them shorter because I still have many interventions and we want to hear back from the panel as well. So please try to keep your statements short. I now turn to Uganda. Uganda, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, for your able management of the session and the CBD Secretariat for all the preparatory work. I also want to thank the Government of Switzerland for hosting us here this week. Indeed, languages provide identity and medium of communication and belonging to the different peoples of the world. Uganda recognizes and supports the statement submitted by the IFB for consideration by COP16. We would, however, like to propose that the statement takes due cognizance and indeed includes local languages as used by local communities as well as the indigenous languages. We would like to thank the experts who provided great insight and experience on the importance and use of indigenous and I add local languages. I have a question for the experts, but I noticed that Brazil has presented some good solutions to the problem of erosion of these indigenous and local languages. I also note that Egypt had the same concern like Uganda has, but I just want to ask the experts to, again, try to throw more light on the threat of erosion of these indigenous and local languages, especially in light of factors such as urbanization and modern education. Knowing that many countries have legislated for the preservation of these languages, but if the experts could throw more light on what else can be done to ensure that these local and indigenous languages can be preserved. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Uganda. Thank you for your question that we'll also try to get answers from the panel. Benin, you have the floor.
Benin would like to thank Switzerland, as well as the Secretariat and the initiators of this meeting, specifically those who have taken the floor. As you know, Benin is a country that hosts voodoo culture, and many languages deal, therefore, with voodoo. And we cannot have voodoo without languages. And there is no voodoo without biodiversity either. Voodoo is essentially linked to water, land, trees, and animals. So that is to say that voodoo is essentially linked to biodiversity. And therefore, at the heart of all of those parts is, of course, languages. So I could therefore, on behalf of Benin, not keep quiet. If we don't have our languages, we've lost everything. In our countries, without any writing, if we want to preserve our traditional knowledge and therefore biodiversity, we need to work harder to preserve languages. The framework and Target 19 of the framework specifically has been laid out, but the issue here is to know how we can better preserve and give sustainability to languages to maintain traditional knowledge. Benin therefore supports any solution which would preserve languages and have better transmission of traditional knowledge. If our meeting today can somehow lead to a number of solutions, specific and tangible solutions to that issue, which will help to preserve the longevity of languages and therefore preserve traditional knowledge, that means that our meeting will have been a success. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Benin, for your statement here. Before we go to the next statement, I just want to remind delegates that we haven't had very many of these statements loaded yet, so please ensure to try to load your statements really within the next hour so we can work on the report. Thank you very much. I give the floor to Colombia.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for giving me the floor. Colombia would like to thank the members of the working group on Article 8J for their strong commitment to these important subjects. We would also like to thank the government of Switzerland and the Secretariat for organizing this meeting. Likewise, our thanks for the beautiful opening speech, as well as for the three speakers who shared some very important elements with us on the subject of maintaining traditional languages with the purpose of ensuring the transmission of traditional knowledge. Chair, Colombia has more than 80 languages, and we have lost approximately 30% of them. Therefore, we recognize the importance of languages in the intergenerational transmission of knowledge and practices, and in particular, we recognize the role of women in this particular area. In this connection, Colombia recommends the inclusion in the background material the inclusion of the next international instruments. First of all, the Convention of Cultural Expressions from 2005, UNESCO Convention, and in addition to that, and as part of the strategy to revitalize and promote the use of languages, we would also like to include in the historical background the establishment of the Ibero-American Institute of Indigenous Languages, which was approved at the Heads of State and Government meeting in 2022. Colombia will have the honor of presiding this convention as of April 2024 for a period of 2 years. We believe that this would be a good practice in order to enact the 10-year program on languages, and this includes the cultural and linguistic revitalization that many have alluded to. And in the case of Colombia, we, of course, refer to the native languages spoken by indigenous people and local communities, and also included in our national action plan, and that is now beginning to be implemented at a local level. We also consider it important, Chairman, to recommend the strengthening of dialogue in all of the spaces of the Convention. This is a dialogue on interculturality, the interscientific dialogue between indigenous people, local communities, organizations, and other stakeholders. This implies institutional agreements that can be come to with the participation of specialized institutions such as UNESCO or the Ibero-American Institute for Indigenous Languages. Furthermore, we'd like to support those statements that we have heard mentioning the need to provide the means of implementation, and in particular the financing for the maintaining of languages and the territories of indigenous people and communities, which will allow the survival of these peoples and therefore the maintaining of their traditional knowledge. Last of all, Chair, we would like to express support to the declaration made by the Indigenous Peoples Statement. Speaker, thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks. Your support to the IFB is noted, and also your comment about financing as well. The floor to Canada. Canada, please.
Thank you, Secretariat. Canada has taken important steps in support of Indigenous languages. In June 2019, the Indigenous Language Act received royal assent. The overall purpose of the Indigenous Language Act is to support the efforts of Indigenous peoples to reclaim, revitalize, maintain, and strengthen Indigenous languages. Among other things, the Act created an Office of the Commissioner of Indigenous Language and works to establish measures to facilitate the provision of adequate, sustainable, and long-term funding. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Canada, for that efficient and brief statement. Thank you very much. Nigeria, you have the floor now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to thank previous speakers and experts for their rich presentation, and also appreciate the government of Switzerland for hosting this event. Nigeria fully acknowledges the role of indigenous languages in the intergenerational transmission of traditional knowledge, innovations, and practices among indigenous peoples and local communities. As such, we have been incorporating as appropriate and revitalization of indigenous languages, given the fundamental role in the intergenerational transmission of traditional knowledge, in the implementation of CBD and Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, including updating and revision of our national biodiversity strategies and action plans, and the preparations of our 7th and subsequent national reports. There are a catalog of rich and meaningful knowledge with our indigenous people that we should take advantage of, especially in conservation, preservation, and management of our biodiversity. Their inputs and integration from planning to execution of programs must not be downplayed. Our ability to tap into their knowledge and build on what they have will determine to a large extent the successes that will be recorded in the implementation of GBF, and this cannot be achieved without the preservation of indigenous language. In Nigeria, we have over 500 languages, and indeed, for any intervention to be owned, accepted, and sustained must be communicated in indigenous language. Often, programs adopt the use of community-driven development through local government that are often members of indigenous people and will lead any deliberations for acceptance. With the special role of indigenous people and local communities, we propose that strategies for mobilizing resources to ensure direct access to funding by indigenous people and local communities to support the implementation of Kunming-Montreal GBF. And also, we want to advocate for the modification of the next in-depth dialogue to be resource mobilization to support the implementation of Kunming-Montreal GBF by indigenous peoples and for indigenous peoples and local communities. At this juncture, let me express our support for the submission or intervention of international indigenous people, and that we support all the proposals submitted by them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nigeria. Your support to the statement of IFB is noted, and also is noted your recommendation with regard to the theme of the next dialogue. So we'd be good if we could get your statement submitted for that. Thank you very, very much. Saudi Arabia, you have the floor.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. ربما ليس لدينا إضافة.
Thank you very much, Chairman. We have nothing else to add after the statements that have been made. We would just like to take this opportunity to address our sincere thanks to the entire team which has dedicated itself to this question of knowledge, of traditional know-how, languages of local communities and indigenous peoples. In Saudi Arabia, we only have one language, which is Arabic, of course, but local communities have, of course, also their specific terms. We believe that they are different public languages, therefore, which translate a number of traditional know-how that's linked to biological diversity. Therefore, it's very important to preserve these specific terms and this terminology. The Ministry of Culture, has a number of programs which aim to preserve traditional knowledge and preserve different cultural elements. I thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very, very much, Saudi Arabia, for your very efficient statement. Thank you indeed. Thank you indeed. The floor goes to Indonesia now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving Indonesia the floor. As this is the first time Indonesia takes the floor, Indonesia would like to thank the government of Switzerland for hosting our meeting and commend the Secretariat for the excellent preparation. On this agenda, as Indonesia herself has 733 local languages, Indonesia acknowledged the very importance of local languages in the intergenerational transmission of traditional knowledge, innovations, and practices among local communities, and more broadly, the links between biological and cultural diversity. Therefore, Indonesia fully supports the current draft recommendation on the issue for the next COP. We have also heard that there are new proposed additions to the draft recommendation, hence Indonesia stands ready to consider these proposed revisions during our meeting this week. In that regard, as we believe it was also stated and proposed by the esteemed delegate of Uganda, Indonesia also proposed to add local languages in paragraph 1 and 2 of the recommendation for consistency purposes with the prior paragraph. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very, very much, Indonesia. Your recommendation on the text is indeed noted. I give the floor to Japan. Japan, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Japan would like to express its appreciation to the panel experts for excellent statements, knowledge, and wisdom on the importance of the linguistic biodiversity. We would like to also thank government of Switzerland for hosting the meeting and for the Secretariat for preparing the program and document. Japan would like to share our views on this matter. Regarding the linguistic diversity, although we have no doubt about the importance of indigenous and national languages, I found myself in a rather strange position in this discussion. In our country, most of the people speak the same language, Japanese. Japanese language has been developed and evolved closely with nature through long history. So we'd like to ask panel members, panel experts, how we should consider the linguistic diversity in such context. I believe this will help us and other parties in similar situations to accommodate the concept into our national context. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Japan. And the panelists will give them a bit of time to manage that as well. Thanks so much. I give the floor to Namibia now. Namibia.
Thank you, Chair. Languages are a vital part of existence of our team of indigenous people and communities. Namibia would like to align itself with the intervention made by Uganda on issues of adding local languages to our text. Namibia has a considerable number of indigenous people and local communities living in our territory as citizens. The majority of these people are San, but there are also other groups. Therefore, Namibia has various obligations toward these indigenous peoples, local communities, and the duty to protect and respect their rights. It is a state party to various international and regional legal instruments that protect the rights of these communities. Namibia has made some commendable effort through its constitution and legislations to ensure that the rights of these people are respected and protected. At the practical level, Namibia has dealt with issues of discrimination against such communities by introducing development programs. And furthermore, Namibia's educational language policy provides that indigenous people and local communities and their children are instructed in languages, in their languages for the first 3 years before changing to English as an official language. However, the practical implementation of these policies remain fraught with various challenges. With that said, Mr. Chair, we suggest that on this agenda item, where we speak of indigenous languages, we want to emphasize that it is important that we make reference to indigenous languages and also include local languages as appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Namibia. Your recommendation is indeed noted. So that is all the speakers we have from parties. I have 2 more speakers coming up. I'm going to ask each of you, 3 speakers now. I'm going to ask you to be very, very brief because we want to have time for our panelists to respond in some way to the many questions we had and then to go back to the co-chair. So first I'm going to start with, women. You have the floor.
Thank you, co-chair. My name is Amelia Arreguin, speaking on behalf of the Women's Caucus. Underscoring the point that diverse languages and knowledge systems reflect the strong and collective relations of indigenous and local communities, including indigenous and local women, with nature and cultural values that uphold conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, and further affirming that indigenous and local women play a critical role in the protection, conservation, and transmission of indigenous and local languages, as clearly and strongly stated during the international dialogue on the implementation of the GBF and the Gender Plan of Action celebrated the last 2 days, we proposed the following concrete edits in the recommendation sections of the document. First of all, in the paragraph starting with also noting, to include indigenous and local women. To add a new paragraph giving a reference to targets 22, 23, and the Gender Plan of Action, in particular the paragraph 2E of the Gender Plan of Action, that highly stress the importance of women and girls from indigenous peoples and local communities, their rights, their language, and their traditions. In the paragraph starting with recognizing that the contribution of indigenous, to add the reference to local languages, as many other colleagues have already requested. In the paragraph starting with also recognizing that diverse languages and knowledges, to add the insertion, systems reflect the strong and collective relations of indigenous and local communities, including indigenous and local women with nature and cultural values that uphold conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, and hence, and then delete can. And instead of referring to current disturbances, as the Secretary of the Convention and many other spaces, we have heard that we are not living or facing current disturbances, but current crises. And in the recommendations, to refer again to local languages as well as indigenous languages, to recognize the role of indigenous and local women and youth. In paragraph 2, to add the insertion of women and youth and other relevant stakeholders. And in the proposal for the next in-depth dialogue, that as well or in parallel of discussing direct access to funding, there are other means of implementations that are equally important, as including capacity building, development, and technical support for IPLCs, but also for women and youth. And finally, a reference to financial transparency and accountability from donors and implementation agencies. Thank you.
Thank you, women. Before I go to, we have another party, but before, I'd like the parties to, before we close the session, if there will be support for the proposals from women. Thanks very much. Okay, so I have two more parties for the floor as well as the other ones. So we're starting to run out of time, colleagues, just letting you know, Sorry, I have a hand from Trinidad and Tobago. Yes, Trinidad and Tobago, please.
Support for
support. Thank you very much, Trinidad and Tobago. So Trinidad and Tobago supports the State for Women. Much appreciated. I'm going to turn to India now. India, please, very briefly if you can. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Chair, Co-Chair, and the Secretariat for giving me this opportunity. I also thank the Swiss government for hosting this. My special thanks to the panel of experts. And they express their wisdom through their own language, and also the other countries they spoke before me. India is also known for its incredible linguistic diversity. It is home for more than 1,600 languages spoken. And forget about the innumerable dialects which are there. And in case of India, it is, having too many number of language, it is not only a matter of pride, but it holds immense cultural and historical significance. And, this is the mother tongue through which the knowledge, particularly, we are more concerned about the biodiversity, which is, transmitted from generation to generation. So the preservation of language is crucial for maintaining cultural identity, promotional multilingualism, and also for preserving the traditional knowledges. So, linguistic diversity is always a testament to the rich tapestry of our culture and traditions that exist. And it is also, very fascinating to see how language shapes the identity of different communities, with each language conveying a unique set of values, beliefs, and customs. We have, like local communities, there are more than 645 distinct tribals in our country. As many of our previous speakers spoke, many of the languages are also in the endangerment and extinction. As per our UNESCO, we all know that if a language is spoken by less than 10,000, it is considered to be endangered. So in India, we have, say, official language policies are there. Through Constitution, it has recognized more than 22 languages. And in case of India, it included NGOs, non-governmental organizations, in preserving various local communities, tribal languages. Many of these languages are also in our schedule, in the constitutional thing. And as previous speakers said, dominance of major languages, migration and urbanizations are we consider as some of the threat. Even lack of awareness also. And in case of India, it has established various language academies, and many states within India, they also tried mother tongue-based multilingual learning. That is also helped in preservation of the languages, and also. In case of India, in order to preserve this traditional rich knowledges, traditional knowledge digital library was created, and which has more than 450,000 medicinal formulations are already in codified form. Apart from that, India has also taken the initiative of People Biodiversity Register. In case of India, more than 270,000 People Biodiversity Registers are there. And India has created biodiversity management committees at grassroots level, and each biodiversity management committee, they are able to make People Biodiversity Register to register various, rich biodiversity. And through this forum, India is in the process of revising, updating its NBSAP, and through its national and regional consultations, it is doing that, and it is also including the local communities for considering their views. And we will be learning a lot from this dialogue. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for that, all those different examples from India. Very good. Madagascar, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for having given us the floor. I'm going to try to be brief. Firstly, we would like to congratulate the Secretariat for the work that it's done. And I would also like to join my voice to what India just said, that we need to underscore the role that education has in the preservation of languages and in the intergenerational transmission of knowledge, innovation, and traditional practices, as well as financing should be mobilized in order to promote informal and formal work in order to transmit indigenous languages through tools and materials that are adequate for those peoples to make sure that each community can use them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you much for being very brief. We now turn to youth. Youth, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. We express our gratitude to the panelists for sharing their wisdom on a very important topic. We also support the statement delivered by the IIFB. For many indigenous youth around the world, the disappearance of our languages in parallel with the continued plunder of the biodiversity in our lands and territories are compounded existential threats. The loss of languages and the loss of nature are two issues that are inextricably linked. One accelerates the other and vice versa. The effect of this loss of language and biodiversity for many indigenous youth is to see the loss of the vitality of our lands and waters, and at the same time, one of our strongest ways to stay connected to it. Moreover, being unable to speak our indigenous language, despite having systemic causes, creates shame and blame for many indigenous youth and can cause detachment from our community and the loss of sense of indigenous pride and identity. With regards to the Global Biodiversity Framework, Section K and Section C emphasize the importance of transformative education on biodiversity that recognize diverse worldviews, values, and knowledge systems of indigenous peoples and local communities. For the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, a transformative education is culture-rooted and supports the transmission of indigenous and local knowledge and languages. Direct learning by indigenous youth through practice, guided by our elders, must be recognized and supported as a fundamental element to the transmission process. Through our network's global consultation process, our community has also expressed that the guidance and teachings of indigenous wisdom are critical for transformative change and for living in harmony with nature. Therefore, ensuring the revitalization of indigenous languages, knowledge, and practices will be essential towards repairing our connection to nature and articulating and realizing our visions for a good life. This is relevant for the whole of humanity. Finally, it must be made extremely clear that the root causes of the loss of nature and our culture are inextricably linked, and they must be addressed together. We must take a holistic approach to addressing the loss of both if we are to live in harmony with nature. Thank you again, Chair, for the space to contribute to this important dialogue.
Great. Thank you very much, Global Youth Biodiversity Network. I have another party. I have Algeria that wishes to take the floor. Algeria, you have the floor.
Merci. Thank you very much, Chair, for having given me the floor. I would like to thank the Secretariat of the Convention for preparing the documents, as well as the Switzerland government's invitation hosting this meeting. In Algeria, Arabic is the official language. We also have Tamazight, which has become a national and official language that has been recognized. So the state of Algeria is working to promote this Tamazight language and all of the varieties that exist throughout the territory. So Tamazight has been increasing in public media, in the public space, and also the President of our Republic has promoted the Amharic language and literature. There are also people who are receiving diplomas and this in the education of this language and are teaching in first and secondary education. So Tamazight could perhaps be a language that would be that would help to preserve biodiversity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Algeria. I'm going to now turn the floor to IPLC 16. Please, if you could keep your remarks to just a couple of minutes. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much, Chairman. First and foremost, I'd like to thank our dear sister for being a co-coordinator, and I speak on behalf of the Latin American and Caribbean Network of Indigenous Women. I would like to start, therefore, by thanking the various countries that have contributed to the voluntary fund to enable the participation of the indigenous peoples and local communities at this meeting. As regards Subject 3 of the provisional agenda, on the subject of indigenous language role in the transmission of knowledge from one generation to another, practices and innovations, the texts that have been expressed on the Biodiversity Forum are something that we can fully support. And it is being studied in the agenda of the upcoming meetings for the open-ended working group. In particular, as regards Article 8J and all of the related provisions of the CBD and also of the Kunming-Montreal Global Framework. We recognize the contributions of the indigenous people and local communities as custodians of biodiversity. We recognize their rights, their knowledges, including the traditional knowledge that is associated with biological diversity, as well as innovation and visions of the world, also the values and practices. We furthermore recognize the important role of women and our elder sisters from the indigenous populations in the transmission of language, culture, knowledge, practices, and innovation. Furthermore, we recognize the link between sure land tendency, territorial tendency, and tendency of waters in order to preserve cultural diversity. We also regret the lack of global diversity because these are necessary in order to achieve our 2050 vision, which is to live in harmony with nature. We also take into account the development process of a new work program and also the interinstitutional arrangements regarding Article 8J and other related provisions that affect indigenous people and local communities. Also, the activities during the International Decade for Indigenous Languages. This decade was proclaimed by the United Nations General Assembly in 2019. I'd like again to thank you very much for giving us the floor. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for your brief statement. The last speaker today, NGO 22. Go ahead.
The interpreters would encourage speakers to please speak slowly. Please speak slowly.
Mucho gusto y muchísimas gracias por esta oportunidad.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you for giving us this opportunity. I would like to add my own voice to the positive interventions that we've heard from state parties and from the indigenous peoples. And that said, I would like to draw the attention of the distinguished people present here to what we call the challenges that are faced by languages and culture, challenges for them to be maintained. This has to do with the spaces where the life of languages and culture and people has to be ensured. And there, the very first right is, of course, the right of a territory, rights to conserve the natural resources of our environment. I am indeed pleased to hear from youth and the concern of youth concerning the interrelationship between language and culture, and also the involvement of new generations in the determination of the educational curriculum in our countries. The interrelationship between language, culture, knowledge, and also production of food as well as plants for health, all of this interrelationship is indispensable. I'd like to thank you for this opportunity, and also I'd like to state that the recommendations that we are hearing, whereby we need to have a more holistic perception of components and the aspect related to the recovery, strengthening, projection, using technology and language and cultures is something that is a major challenge for us all. It's a challenge for the indigenous peoples, and it's a challenge for the member states. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very, very much. Thank you so much. We are a bit over time, but I'm going to give our panelists each just a couple of minutes to maybe address some of the main questions. I think in general, some of the questions we heard are a bit of a reiteration of what are the main threats, and then also some of the mechanisms that we can be using to preserve. So I'll just go across, and I will ask our panelists for a couple of minutes. So we'll start with you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much to all who have taken the floor. They have enthusiastically shown how important this subject is. I would like to refer to some of the issues addressed. I won't be able to address all of the questions that were asked. The first one has to do with the threats to the languages spoken by indigenous peoples. I think that in addition to the threats that indigenous territories are suffering, for example, such as the lack of tenancy, also criminal activities, more in some regions than in others, etc., we actually also see the risk of policies that aim at energy transition, green economies, etc., and these policies may be very well intended in terms of providing clean energy and reducing emissions, but they can be a danger if they don't take into account the vulnerabilities of indigenous peoples, and it can end up harming them more. As regards immigration processes that are accelerating throughout different parts of the world, we are also seeing greater vulnerability of the indigenous languages because they end up in places that are away from their birthplace. Also, we see an increase in hate speech conveyed through corporate means that usually disguise such speech as freedom of the press or freedom of speech or opinion without there being an institutional reaction. All of this is also a danger for the use of indigenous languages in different contexts. As regards the question, what can we do? How can we enable the protection of the languages of indigenous peoples? Well, I think there are several levels. First of all, we have the international level, where without a doubt we have a starting point. We have received quite a few pointers in that respect, but at a national level, increasing the holistic approach by educational systems is a fundamental component. This includes the need to give greater financial support to the educational systems of the indigenous peoples, and also at an international level, it requires increasing participation by indigenous people in decision-making, for example, regarding mechanisms and procedures for financing. This is of fundamental importance. I would like to conclude by saying that I recognize the progress that's been made in Brasilia and in Vancouver on the subject of having earmarked funds. For the time being, this is just an aspiration for the financing of indigenous peoples. However, this does need more fine-tuning. For example, we should increase the transparency of what funds are aimed at indigenous peoples or local communities, what are self-owned institutions, what are funding institutions. All of these are important efforts we need to make and have greater clarity so that we can work united in this noble objective. Thank you very much. We have a lot to speak about, and I'd just like to end by saying that for the indigenous peoples, most of them have a holistic view, and the difference between culture and nature is not so clearly established because spirituality is in the middle of the two. It is not necessarily that we speak about religion, but it is necessary to see it from a holistic perspective. This is something where we could speak extensively in other areas as well as here. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Yolanda, for you.
Sí, muchas gracias.
Thank you, Chair. Indeed, the discussion has been a very rich one this morning. We have heard our different brothers and sisters take the floor. Speaking from my experience as a teacher and also as an indigenous woman, I have heard questions as to why indigenous people can't exercise their rights. And I think we need to look at the structural reasons for this. Where were these reasons born? They arise from colonization. I don't think we can forget that. From the indigenous peoples, we speak about generational traumas that are transmitted, conveyed from one generation to another. As an educator, as a teacher, every day I have to deal with this type of problem. That is why I speak about forgiveness and reconciliation. I think a true pardon is something that would help us understand what respect is. Moving on to sort of more modern concepts, let's look at the extractive industries. When we speak about mining or about logging trees, we are killing fauna, we are killing flora, destroying sacred places, and we are displacing our indigenous brothers and sisters. And this displacement causes pain and causes loss of culture. These people have to move to other places and are forced to learn different knowledge and to unlearn their traditional knowledge. So I would say that these new industries, the extractive industries, do have an impact on human health, but they also have an impact on the conservation or destruction of the Mother Earth. Let me say that I was deeply touched by one of the questions when we were asked about what the strategies can be. Well, here, let me speak as a mother. Following all the scientific developments that we are all witnessing in regard to language. If we want to recover language, I don't think that's going to happen at school. It is from the moment when the child is in her mother's womb. That's when we need to speak to the child. We need to ensure that the unborn child become accustomed to the musicality and the tones of his mother's language, so that when the child is born to the external world, the child will recognize its language, will respect its language, its musicality, and its culture. I think that is a fundamental value. Also taking into account that children's socialization at an infant level has to be integrally tied to the use of indigenous language. We cannot socialize a Quechua child by using the Spanish language. However, for our needs as indigenous peoples, as indigenous women, we need to respect and accept the fact that we are indigenous and that all of that feeling and cultural complexity of being indigenous, what it represents. We need to change the social and cultural fabric through new practices, through a new vision of what we have before us. I also would like to tell you that as far as schools are concerned, we speak about recovering languages and establishing educational programs, etc. But we also need to take into account the fact that recovering a language is something that takes 8 to 10 years. After that, we may or may not speak about the fact that a child is fluent or not in a language. So let's not forget that we can create intercultural and linguistic policies, but we need funds to work with, to work out in the country, in the field. It is a huge investment with time. We need to work at the grassroots level upwards, not the other way from top down. And in this process, we require more time. We need to cohabit with our own people. We need to understand what their needs are. And we need to understand what their internal policies are, what the customary laws are that will govern the use of language and the practice of culture, which go hand in hand. This would be my own thoughts. We've heard a lot of questions. I am deeply touched at hearing interest in the agreements we might reach or what recommendations we will make from the human side, from the educational side, from the scientific side. But all of us bear a social and collective responsibility to work not just on our languages, but on the recovery of our ecosystems, recovery of biodiversity, of the Mother Earth, of the Pachamama. If we want to be well, then let us work co-responsibly and also thinking about social justice, bearing in mind not just those of us who are here, but those who in the indigenous thought belong for the generations that will follow us. We also need to feel a sense of social responsibility, the fact that we need to leave behind as a legacy a healthy Pachamama, a Mother Earth, so that those who come behind us will not suffer. That would be my thought, and that would be my contribution. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Yolanda. And a few more comments from our last panelist. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm very happy to hear the numerous interventions. So I'm going to try to respond to three essential questions. The first, from our friend from the DRC. I first of all would like to congratulate the DRC for the law that they have recently adopted for indigenous peoples. Now, the principles of the issues which are threatening traditional know-how is, first of all, the non-recognition of indigenous languages, and, let me add to that, climate change, which pushes populations to immigrate, and that means that regions automatically lose their languages and their traditional knowledge. The consequence of that is that the international community will lose a part of its memory, its global memory. We don't kill our own grandmother, right? We always need our grandmother in our lives. Such is the same thing for traditional knowledge. The second question, I'll respond in Arabic because it's from my distinguished friend from Egypt who made a link between religion and languages.
وسأجيبه بالعربية لأن لا يمكن.
So, in Arabic, allow me to respond. Maybe it's going to be difficult to translate, but the Quran says, more or less, that the creation of different peoples, the multiplicity of languages and different races, these are all shared by everyone. It's shared blood. So preserving languages, indigenous people languages, must therefore be a duty. And to that is added the fact that the multiplicity of your languages, well, what I want to say here is that this verse of the Quran is of particular import and therefore a lesson to be learned. Allow me to return to French now.
Indissociable.
We cannot separate indigenous languages or the promotion and preservation of traditional knowledge from traditional languages. We have to recognize traditional languages in order to have the preservation of traditional knowledge. So I would propose to create a fund worldwide for the promotion of indigenous languages, an international fund for the promotion of indigenous languages. This would be a great step to preserve a part of the international community's memory. And I would recommend to the Convention on Biological Diversity to continue this dialogue and, in future, subject to investigate examples of successes in preserving indigenous languages to create a clear vision for everyone who wishes to promote their language. And we have many, many examples which are excellent examples with regard to the preservation of indigenous languages. I've just said we have Morocco's example, Algeria's example that I know, in North Africa. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very, very much. I'm going to turn now to the chair to close the panel, and I apologize to our interpreters for the overtime. Thank you.
I would like to thank the expert panelists, distinguished participants, and the Secretariat for this timely dialogue. It is a timely reminder that our negotiations on future work take place during the International Decade for Indigenous Languages and the significance of Indigenous languages for knowledge transmission. As a main agenda item for this meeting is the consideration of a new proposed program of work and institutional arrangements concerning Indigenous peoples and local communities. These panelists have given us some food for thought in order to realize and maximize the contributions of the collective and local actions of Indigenous peoples and local communities to the goals of the Convention and our vision of living in harmony with nature by 2050. As is our usual practice, a summary of the discussions will be annexed to the report on this meeting. The document WG8j-12/2 on the in-depth dialogue on the thematic areas and other cross-cutting issues proposes a draft recommendation. In paragraph 3, which proposes a topic for the in-depth dialogue to be held at the next meeting of the working group. The proposed topic for the next in-depth dialogue is strategies for mobilizing resources to ensure direct access to funding by Indigenous peoples and local communities to support the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. There were proposals from IIFB, which was supported by several parties, and there were also suggestions from some parties to make some amendments while keeping the theme. Also, we have the CBD Women Caucus, which was supported by parties. Thank you. There was a suggestion from one party, Argentina, for a different topic. The co-chairs will consult with Argentina with the help of the Secretariat and will prepare a CRP for this item. Now I'd like to open the floor if there's any further interventions, if any. I think it's time to close and it's decided. Distinguished delegates, we have completed item 3 of our agenda. Yes. Distinguished delegates, it is now close to 1:30 p.m., and I would like to bring this session to a close for the lunch break. The working group will meet again this afternoon at 3 p.m. After lunch today, representative of the COP presidency will move to the first readings of and item 4 on progress in the implementation of the program of work on Article 8J and the related provisions, and item 6, which relates to the development of the new program of work and institutional arrangements. We invite parties to help with this task by combining their views on agenda items 6 and 4 into one statement as to make a single intervention. Then, if there is time, we will move to item 5 on knowledge management component of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Lastly, I invite everyone to participate in the side events during the lunch break. The topics of side events are closely related to the issues on the agenda and provide an opportunity for all to engage in more in-depth technical discussions. I now close the session of the working group. The working group will meet again after lunch at 3 p.m. Thank you.